So great to have you with us. I suppose we were coming a bit sometimes from the high policy and business level to something which a lot of people will immediately recognize this topic, even if they're not really experts in the debate. Tell me, just give me to start us off a sense, here we are, 2022, how should packaging be rethought and redesigned? So what can companies really do to drive forward changes there that don't put them at competitive disadvantage? Are you seeing an inflection point here?
Yeah. No, thank you very much, and thank you all for the opportunity to speak here. It's really a pleasure. You hear of my weird accent, and I'm not a native English speaker. I'm originally from the Netherlands, a country that is very small and highly populated, so not a lot of space physically for landfill, and a country that is 1/3 below sea level, so clear incentive in order to drive sustainability. I'm working for Avery Dennison for more than 20 years. I'm running the North American business. And it might not be the most well-known name. We're not making appealing television series or snacks and
Not
drinks.
yet.
Not yet. But I'm pretty optimistic that probably you all touch our product every day. We are the largest manufacturer of pressure-sensitive labels. And those labels go on important products like food and beverages, home and personal care products like shampoos and etc., pharma products, and also e-commerce products. So the packages that arrive at your doorstep every day normally carry our labels, and sometimes there's a label inside, if you don't like it, that you can ship it back. So I would say particularly during the pandemic, it was quite important and essential that we could keep these supply chains running and supply these products to the society. But despite that importance, it's of course at least equally important that at the end of the consumption that the product, the packaging, does not end up in a landfill or in marine litter. And so that's really important to us. And I think it's for the first time in this crisis period of the last 2 years that sustainability has not been deprioritized, but has in fact accelerated. And as Avery Dennison, we see it as our purpose in order to support and drive sustainable solutions. So we have 2050 commitments, like the previous speakers, to be net zero. We also have for 2030 a target to reduce emissions by 70%, and also to drive our entire supply chain to drive scope 3 emissions down by 30%. And so just to name a few of the things that we're focusing on in terms of circularity, we provide label materials that are recyclable and that have recycled contents. Particularly in North America, that is sometimes a bit of a challenge. In Europe, we took pride that we had the broadest range of materials with recycled contents. Here, the infrastructure still has to evolve, and so we're literally collecting waste from our customers and bringing it to our suppliers in order to use that as a source of raw material again and have then label material with recycled contents. And the other piece, what is probably even more important, because the label is of course a very small part of the packaging overall, is that the label enables the recyclability of the container, of the packaging. And so we have a product, a new technology, which is called AD CleanFlake, Avery Dennison CleanFlake, and that's a technology that the label can be easily be separated from the bottle. So after collection, after sorting, after washing, the empty containers go through a grinding process, and due to the different density, the particles of the PET beverage bottle or the HDPE shampoo bottle get separated from the adhesive and from the label, so that you have pretty clean streams of material that will feed this raw material again. And then one more thing that I'm
quick
excited...
last point, because let's get some questions in as well.
One more point is on intelligent labels. So we are the largest UHF RFID partner in the world, and so we are able to provide functionality to the label to drive brand owners to connect with consumers, but also to enable traceability of packaging. And there's a lot of functionality that is derived from that.
I wanted to dig in a bit to what is difficult here, because as you've reflected, you have some useful, innovative product. We'll hear a lot about that today across different sectors. But I think you've also reflected that recycling is actually quite difficult. It's more difficult than perhaps a lot of consumers realizing the detail. And of course, if you also need to do it with bearing in mind what we heard from the guest from PepsiCo a moment ago in a strongly competitive business environment, it is hard to get the efficiencies around it right, or at least as things stand at the moment. So what do you regard as the greatest barriers here?
I'd say there's a few, and I'll be short on that. First of all, the technical complexity of recycling, that's one. But of course, you can allocate a lot of R&D resources in order to tackle that problem within the company or within the ecosystem in collaboration with others. I think what's probably more important is to have a consistent standard or consistent standards across the industry, and also consistent policies across the region. And so not that it differs by state or even by county, because it undermines to have an efficient infrastructure for collection and recycling, but it also undermines credibility with the end user. And there I come to the last barrier, and that is basically education of the consumer, because the consumer likes to have a product or a packaging with recycled contents, but the behavior is not always there yet in order to do the required activity in order to bring that bottle to the place where it belongs so that it can be recycled.
Hence your example of actually collecting things.
Absolutely.
So you make that part of the offer. And where does regulation fit in here? I think that's it's a kind of a dog that's barked through a lot of the discussions. Is really that distance sometimes between government, between regulatory authorities, between business and all of those who are stakeholders. Given that there's state and federal level here in the US, where you're active yourself, and then there is your policy initiatives like EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, are these things well aligned?
I think there's still a lot of work to do. We see more and more that the industry is driving collaboration within the entire vertical system and the ecosystem. We've initiated, we're one of the founding members of an association called C-Lab in order to develop solutions, develop standards and develop that infrastructure. I think the point is, of course, to work also closely with policymakers in order to have consistent standards and enable an efficient infrastructure across the entire country.
So when we talk about that, do you mean that you are clear that the drive to that is going in the right direction? And it's also, I have to be honest, it is a world of a lot of acronyms. There's that kind of policy framework. And then there's something like C-Lab, am I right? C-Lab. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so C-Lab is an overcoupling organization that is an association of starting from chemical producers to packaging producers to retailers to companies that are in logistics, so recycling companies, in order to develop that standard and those technical capabilities. And I think also with such an association, you have a clear spokesperson towards the policymakers.
So that's the idea, that you bring those
Absolutely.
different groups or interests together, and then you go with one voice to the regulator or the policymaker.
Absolutely. And
how's that going?
Well, it's a challenge, and it's a fine balance, because of course we do want some regulations and some incentives. On the other hand, it needs to be in very close collaboration with the industry in order to make sure that it's encouraging, but it's also achievable and it's pragmatic.
Usually at this point, when I'm talking to someone, particularly in a sort of big company, they will talk a lot about collaboration, and this has been very good. It's been a bit of an optimistic theme that we've heard this morning. We might hear more about what it means in practice and any barriers this afternoon in smaller groups. And there's just a bit of me being a kind of, an annoying journalist. It's like, there must be some limits on this, and what's the trade-off between collaboration and still being in a very competitive market, and also, not being kind of triaged or having people come along who will maybe sign up to these things, these wonderful acronyms, which are well planned. I don't think we're getting the sense that this is now an entirely a sort of a greenwashing issue, but there will be those looking for advantage for themselves within it, and how do you make that difficult call.
So I make the separation. Of course, we have R&D efforts, and we try to develop solutions, new products with which we try to differentiate ourselves. And of course, as we try to differentiate, we want to be competitive, and it's intellectual property, and we want to drive that potentially with suppliers or so. There's other solutions like creating this infrastructure in order to collect and recycle and having standards. Where, for example, distance is very important. So you have to use the economies of scale. You cannot compete for waste streams. You need to have the collective industry approach there in order to enable such an efficient infrastructure. And so, and that goes well above the interest of an individual company. It's in order to protect our industry and it's protect our sustainable world.
I've got to ask you what the most interesting example is of a packaging or disposal innovation, just something where you maybe pinch yourself and think, when you started doing this job or got interested in this, what's the one that stands out for you?
Can I make two?
Go on then.
So the one is the AAD Clean Flag, what is separated. I'd just like to mention that because we're launching that this year, and it is going to be implemented for 80% of the product portfolio. So it's becoming the standard. I think that's really essential because there's a lot of sustainable products at a price premium, and in the end they end up in a niche, and so they don't make sufficient impact. The other point that I'd like to raise is about the intelligent labels. So the combination between the material aspects and the digital aspects of a label. It enables brands to connect with customers. It enables traceability. And you can just imagine with intelligent features of the label how you could enable this sorting and recycling, or even give a reward to consumers for bringing it at the right space. And it goes beyond just the product information or the product itself. It also enables, for example, to drive bigger purposes like food waste or other. We see a very large adoption already in the apparel, and now we're driving also in logistics and in food segments. So that is really exciting.
And if we were meeting back here, say next year, what do you think we'd be looking at in innovations that you think have been particularly impactful? I mean, you've spoken a bit about your own. Feel free to share the love. Anyone else doing anything else, or any parts of the sector doing things that you think we ought to have our eye on if we're looking to the world ahead?
Yeah, I would say particularly the intelligent labels, and there's different technologies. RFID is one, but there are other things, 3D printing or various digital watermarks in the printing. I think that will open new possibilities in order to drive much more sustainable.
Oh, you were seriously telling me that I won't have to take my printer cartridges and put them in an envelope and take them to the post office, which I'm now currently doing religiously in London. You'd be happy to hear, but it doesn't feel to me like the most 21st century solution to those printer cartridges problems.
No, but I mean the print on the label itself, so that when the bottle then gets returned, for example, for the sorting, you can easily sort because you can read. It's not visible for the consumer, but the machine can sort and recognize what the material of the container is for, and so that you have clean, dedicated waste streams.
It's all just going to be a lot simpler. Thank you very much indeed, Jerome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.